I'm Tobias Revel.
And I'm Radha Mystery.
And this is Futur-ish, a podcast about how nothing is new and everything has happened before.
We've been working and playing in futures for over a decade of hype and bluster amidst increasing uncertainty and complexity.
In each episode, we explore a recent event or signal for its historical context and speculate on future possibilities.
And make it make sense for people like you and me.
In moderately good news, it's raining here, kind of. Well, drizzling by London standards. So I don't have to water my garden today, which is great. California apparently is not in drought officially for the first time in I don't know how many years. I think it was 25 years, but I could be wrong.
So always a silver lining.
Exactly. Always a silver lining. All right. Is this another Buckle Up Bubba episode?
I don't know if it's a Buckle Up Bubba episode, actually, I'm afraid. I think it's a little bit sad. The world is full of news at the moment. And obviously, there's been a couple of items that have dropped and have been a little bit off the radar. But the piece of news that I doubt it made a splash up over there was the ceasing of operations of the car sharing company, Zipcar. You familiar with Zipcar at all?
Wow. Yes, I am. That is wild. Okay, say more.
It's been huge in the UK for a number of years, and I'll tell a little bit of that story. But on December 31st, 2025, Zipcar stopped operating in the UK. And, lots of people, myself included, think that this is an absolutely catastrophic failure of policy, really, because the reason that it didn't survive was because it was losing money, but it was losing money because the policy frameworks weren't there to enable car sharing as a sort of transit model, which meant that they just couldn't afford to operate anymore. And I think what's tragic for me personally is, as an avid hater of cars and the destruction they cause, it is the foreclosure of what felt like a step towards a future where we had less private car ownership. But I do want to end on a positive, because we have the future of transport, and we've had the future of transport for a long time. So I want to be clear. I want to be clear to everybody. This is a very personal thing for me. I have a vehement evidence-led belief that if we could move beyond cars, we would have much better societies, environments, and
I agree.
General lives.
Honestly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I want to lay out that case, and then lay out the case for a future of transport that we all know and love and could get really comfortable with if we only had the right policy frameworks in place. And really it is about policy. We have the technology, we have the design. It's just about the right incentives in the right place at the right time. So you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Take it away.
So Zipcar, as I said, Zipcar folded December 31st, 2025 in the UK. They're currently still sitting around, and it's very sad actually, because there's, if you're a Londoner, you probably see a Zipcar on every other street. They're all over the place, and they're currently out of operations. They're just sort of sat there languishing, which is a bit sad. But it was founded in 2000 by two entrepreneurs in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it was bought then by Avis Budget in 2013 for 491 million United States dollars, otherwise known as 371 million pounds. It does continue to operate in 25 US states and in 3 cities in Canada. And the way it works for Zipcar, if you're not familiar, it's you pay a monthly fee. In the UK, it's about £7, which is hardly anything. And then they have different ways of using Zipcars. So you can either pay by hour or you can pay by miles. So it depends on the type of trip you're making. You just book it in an app, and then you can just walk up and take it. And like I said, if you're in London, there's one on every other street, and they tend to be very easy to find. So not only does car sharing have enormous economic and environmental benefits, so for instance, Transport for London estimates that each Zipcar removes 10 to 14 private cars from ownership.
Wow.
So given that there are about 3,000 Zipcars in London, that's about 38,000 fewer cars.
That's great for congestion.
I did some calculations. I did maths.
Okay.
Bear with me. So,
dear Lord, I hope this is accurate.
look, I work really hard on this.
You
maths,
can't
so
even
keep
take your
distracting
math
from me.
seriously. How am I supposed to?
I'm very excited by this maths.
Go
It's a
on.
big part
Go
of my
on.
life. Right.
Go on.
The average Londoner drives for around 3 hours a week, which for a Zipcar, so that's £7 monthly plus paying for either by hour or by mile, would cost you about £1,200 a year.
Wow.
This isn't LA. We're not driving to work.
For those of us in the States, that's about $1,600 US per year. That's not very much compared to the cost of maintaining a car of your own.
You don't have to pay congestion charge in London. That's part of the package. And you don't have to pay for fuel or electricity if you've got an electric one, because that's also part of the package. You just pay that £7 a month, then the per mile. The equivalent for it to privately own and operate a car in London is about £3,400 a year. So it's 2.5 times as expensive, something like that, to run a private car in London compared to a Zipcar. So that economically, it just makes a lot more sense. Now, at the time of closing, Zipcar had 650,000 members. And of course, the closure generated a bit of press here, mostly because of the outrage from councils and campaigning groups at the Mayor of London and for Transport for London. So the reason for the closure is suggested that Transport for London were about to introduce an £18 a day congestion charge for electric vehicles. So hitherto, electric vehicles haven't had to pay congestion charge, but they're about to introduce an £18 a day charge, which Zipcar and some analysts have suggested was the sort of nail in the coffin. But Zipcar had been losing money for years. They lost £11.6 million in 2024, which commentators put down to what we over here call hashtag Cosy Lives. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept, the cost of living crisis.
You'll abbreviate anything, won't you?
If we can turn a multi-syllable word into 2 syllables, we're well happy.
Into something indecipherable.
I think if you said Cosy Lives to anyone in the street in London, they'd be like, yeah, I know. They'd totally understand it. The other thing was the overhead, right? So Zipcar had a free floating model, which meant that some of the cars, not all of them, but I think actually the majority of them, you could pick up and drop off anywhere you liked, which meant there's enormous overhead in sending out people to clean them and refuel them and everything else. So that was another reason for the costs. In your sense of the future, and you're thinking about your future city and you're doing a workshop with a client or whatever, is car sharing a bit of that future? Is this part of,
Absolutely.
Is this a trend that you were seeing?
You probably remember we used to talk so much about multimodal transportation, and that included car sharing, right? So it was this idea that you could walk, ride a bicycle, use buses, trains, all of that. And then you could also use ride sharing. And I think the really cool part about that too was a conversation around how much less parking we would require if fewer people owned private cars, and what else might we gain in the landscape of the city if we could have access to that land again. So for sure it was on all of our mood boards.
I mean, you think about that number of 10 to 14 cars for every Zipcar. In the scale of London, it's a relatively small dent, but if that was to continue to expand, this closure of Zipcar, though, coincides with the arrival of autonomous cars on our shores. Now, I know you've had these little beasties for a while over there, right? You've got them in LA, but there's definitely in San Francisco. You've got Waymos in LA, right?
Yeah, I mean, they go through my neighborhood every single day.
Let me give you the UK scope.
Give me the scope.
The UK government has fast-tracked autonomous vehicles pilots to spring 2026, so just a few weeks down the road now. There's a couple of companies arriving, most of them familiar to you and our listeners, I'm sure. So Lyft, LYFT, they're coming with Baidu's Apollo Go model, which is otherwise known as Baidu's Robotaxi. Google will be putting Waymo out. They call it the first European city, but they don't know what they're talking about.
Did they forget that y'all exited the EU?
I like that they didn't, and I don't want to assuage them of that notion. Like, yeah, we're still European. I'm totally fine to be called European. So Waymo's coming. So you've ridden in a Waymo. What's it like?
I've ridden in a Waymo twice. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. And I hate saying this. It makes my soul hurt, but it was really convenient. It came straight to my door.
How does it work?
So you have an app that you download in much the same way that you probably would have used an app for Zipcar or Uber or Lyft or any of these other, ride sharing things. You request your ride. You tell it where it's going. It arrives. You have a Bluetooth key thing where you can unlock the car from your phone, and then you just pop in, and on the screen inside it says, "This ride is for Radha." And then you can see on the map where it's going. You can modify all of the settings inside. So music, air conditioning, all of that. And I can take private calls in there. I literally don't have to worry about whether or not the driver's going to be creepy and I feel unsafe and therefore have to share my location with my husband. And so that part of it does feel quite nice. And then you just pop out and the car locks and it goes to its next place. And it's easy peasy, And here in LA, because parking is such an issue, if you're going someplace where there isn't parking, I'm usually probably going to Uber or carpool with a friend or something like that. So it ends up being a lot easier in that regard. The other day I saw 2 in line behind each other while I was dropping my kids off to school. So they're everywhere.
Well, so those are coming, which is going to be interesting. And I hadn't considered the safety element actually, which is really important. There's also a UK startup called Oxa, OXA. They're going to be putting some out. So that's been going for about 15, 20 years actually. There have been some already that have been doing trials without passengers in the UK. So Uber is going to be working with Wave to put what are called level 4 vehicles on the street. So level 4 vehicles is what you described, Waymo. So it can drive itself in specific areas and humans are able to take over if needed. And I've seen Wave because they've been trialing them around our office. There's a big difference here, and one of the skepticisms about Waymo is there's two different kind of technical approaches to them. So Waymo is map-centered and rule-based, which is one of the reasons they've been trialing in sort of grid-based cities a lot. So they have a kind of grid, they have a rough estimation of what should be going on the road, and then they have some preset rules about what to do if such and such a thing happens, which is why also I'm sure you've seen it more than I have, all these videos of Waymos getting stuck because a duck wanders into the road or something and they've never seen a duck before, so they think it's like an atomic bomb. I don't know.
The other day at an intersection, all the traffic lights had gone down and it went to stop signs, and the Waymo that we saw on the way home literally was stalled and had its alerts on, and it didn't really know what to do. So can't imagine it's great in an emergency setting.
So the alternative to that, where once there's no rules for what to do in this particular situation, it sort of stalls up, is the wave approach, which is to do almost entirely generative learning. So it basically learns as it goes all the time, which, is interesting because, and this is a different podcast, those are the sort of sites of contestation in the computer science around AI. And that's obviously aimed more at European markets where there's lots of different typologies of streets and lots of different things going on. It's not so easy to model. So this is obviously there's a lot of unsurprising bullishness about autonomous cars as the future of transport in different ways. Some statistics for you. So they've got an estimated forecast CAGR of 35% to 2035. So basically growing by a third in the next 10 years, and a jump estimated in value from 34 billion in 2026, $34 billion US dollars, to $5.43 trillion, comparing to thinking about car sharing as a future. And you talked about the idea that it would free up space, things like that. What do you think about implications for our cities when you think about this burst in autonomous vehicles? You've sort of got front row seats for it, but you've also got experience of London.
There's two things. One is I see a divestment from public transit. And so we're not investing as much in upkeeping or investing in new public infrastructure. And I think this has been proven over time with data for decades now, ends up being better for the planet as well. I also think policy has not caught up yet. They don't completely know what to do with the chaos and volatility of just city life, right? Or human beings and human error or car error. And so until those policy structures kind of catch up, I do worry about the unintended consequences of putting things like this out on the street. And for me, it's like they're driving through my neighborhood. My kids ride their bikes on our sidewalk. So it's things like that we have to be thinking about. What is the feedback loop? What is the dialogue or the discourse that happens with a vehicle like this? And what are the guardrails that we can rely on?
Autonomous vehicles are a great example of this idea that you don't question the underlying epistemology of your thinking, you just add automation. So, instead of questioning why there's so many road deaths, what's wrong with traffic and the way we design roads, you just go, well, humans and machines are equivalent, but machines are better. So we'll just replace the human bit with the machine bit, and you end up with autonomous vehicles.
That seems flawed.
It does seem flawed, doesn't it? Autonomous vehicles are as much a sort of symbolic achievement as a needed or literal achievement. No one's really, you're not really solving any particular problem with an autonomous vehicle. And they are a useful shibboleth of progress because, again, much like things we've talked about before, we've had them in our minds since the 1960s. So it's sort of saying, remember that thing we've been talking about for 50 years? We've now built it.
The question I also have is there were all of these people that fed into this story of the gig economy, all of these Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, the taxi cabs, all of that. What happens to that part of the economy now that has been propelled by ride sharing? Where do all of those people go with the advent of something like this?
Nothing is new and everything's happened before. Langdon Winner was talking about the implications on farm workers of automation in the 1980s, saying, look, what are all these workers going to be doing when you've turned all the farm work into machines? It's the same question, I suppose.
Well, one thing I think about is this trend towards a greater aging population. And one of the uses I have seen for Waymo is, adult children sending Waymos to go pick up their elderly parents to send them to the doctor's office or something. And so for them, walking to the train station or driving a car is not safe and it's not easily accessible. And so in that situation, it doesn't make the case for completely saying we should have these on the road everywhere. I think the solution is something that's more like multimodal. But I can see the benefit in a use case like that.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Fair. Nonetheless, the biggest problem with the damage that cars do isn't because they're not autonomous. It's because they're cars. It's cars that kill people, not the fact that they're not robot cars. And this is the reason I hate cars so much. Do you know how many people were killed in 2024 by cars?
Only because I have the notes up here. I'll let you say the number.
The World Health Organization estimated that 1.19 million people were killed in 2024 by cars in car accidents. Possibly with up to another million people, estimates vary, 500,000 to a million people who had their lives foreshortened by the pollution caused by cars. So, arguably about 2 million people were killed by cars in 2024.
When you say foreshortened by pollution from cars, what are you talking about?
Well, essentially, they might have got heart diseases or cancers because of the pollution that was caused by cars. So they would have lived longer. The thought experiment I sometimes do is if I was to come to you and say, I've invented this thing, it's going to make our lives so much more convenient and it's going to mean you don't have to walk to the shops anymore, but it's going to kill 2 million people a year, you wouldn't accept that. You would be like, no. That's a terrible design. Go back and start again. Anyway, so 2 million people arguably killed in 2024 by vehicles. And again, I said at the beginning, this is a personal thing. It's very hard for me to understand how you can look at that number and still make an argument for cars. And one of the arguments of autonomous vehicles, robot cars, is the idea that they're safer. But 83 people were killed by autonomous vehicles in 2024. Now, 83 obviously isn't 2 million. It's a much smaller number. But I, again, did some classic Revel maths. Also, by the way, I haven't put it in the notes here, but it's the second most common cause of death of under 14s in the world is death by car. So it's mostly kids who are dying. So for all the cars in the world, 2 million people, 1.19 million people being killed by them. That's 0.000002 deaths per car. So in other words, 2/10,000th of a person dies per car. But for autonomous vehicles, and again, this is not a useful correlation because the sample size is so small, 0.6 people per autonomous vehicle. So they are more lethal at the moment than a normal car is. But that's sort of by the by, because every death is unforgivable. If someone died because their washing machine exploded, there'd be a mass recall of the product and no one would have the washing machine anymore.
But they would still continue to innovate to make it better and not be a death wish.
Yeah, but we don't design death out of cars. We design them worse. We make them bigger and scarier. We protect the people inside.
Yeah, and I don't deny that that's not the problem, but I do think that autonomous vehicles are very, very new, and I think maybe it's about having better policy and continuing to test these out in places that are not, super dense in urban areas.
I don't think innovation is the solution to deaths caused by cars. I think the solution is less cars. I think it's that straightforward. You just design our way out of cars. We can do something better.
I believe you.
Ride sharing was a kind of glimmer of that. Less cars, more sharing, lower the risk. The other thing about cars, they socialize the risk. It's other people who suffer the effects of the pollutions. It's other people who suffer if they hit a pedestrian or a 14-year-old. Because 14-year-olds aren't going around driving cars, generally speaking.
Yeah.
They're being killed by other people. If we were to sit down now, we were to clear the board and say, right, we got people we got to move. We got cities. We got goods we got to move. Let's design the perfect form of transport. Doesn't kill people. It's got to be socially generous, so it doesn't socialize the risk. It's got to be psychologically and physically rejuvenative, so it's got to make you better by using it, not just make your life slightly more convenient or comfortable. What would you design?
I guess not a car, but I don't think it's one thing, right? I do think it's more public transportation, and I do think it's smaller scale solutions, so something like the bicycle, something...
You can stop there, because there is no better design than the bicycle. It is literally perfect. And not just I think that, but a number of scholars who I will now quote liberally.
Continue. Your bias is showing, but continue.
Well, this is the thing, is I am biased, but also that bias comes from a place of knowledge of futures in design.
Yeah.
It is impossible to perfect this design. It's just the correct design. And I'm happy to make that case. The future of transport is the bike. So let's make the case for the bike. The bike does not socialize risk. If you make a mistake, you get hurt rather than someone else. It's not someone else's responsibility that you have to drive safely. There are no records I could find, and I did genuinely try and search. There are no records for the number of deaths caused by cycling. There's lots of records of deaths of cyclists on roads caused by cars. The only story I could find was a story I actually remember from 2021, which was a cyclist jumping a red light in London, hit a pedestrian who got a head injury and died. It was horrible and it was stupid. The tabloid press were outraged, and this resulted in the passage of a law that gave mandatory life sentences for death by dangerous cycling. In that same year, 1,700 people were killed by cars in the UK, of which the average sentence was 2 to 18 years. But let's also just look at general well-being. The Journal of Epidemiology did a study in 2024 that found commuter cyclists were 15% less likely to be prescribed antidepressants than a control population. 2025 study found that cycling is a significant predictor of psychological well-being. So no direct correlation they could find, but they said if you were to look at sort of different people, there's a significant chance that cyclists are going to be a happier group of people than other groups of people. Obvious physical health benefits. 2020 longitudinal study in the UK, a massive study of about 780,000 people since 1991, found that regular cycling reduced the chance of cardiovascular disease by 24% and the chance of cancer by 16%. So massive benefit for a huge amount of people.
Okay.
2021 study of almost 100,000 commuters in Stockholm, Sweden, found that regular cycling reduced the chance of premature death by up to 16%. And the WHO has done a lot of work about the social benefits in terms of enhancing people's sense of place and their relationship with the local community and so on and so forth, because they're more literally in touch with it. They're not locked away in a box. Then there's the obvious environmental benefits. The 2021 study from the University of Oxford showed that if just 10% of short trips were replaced by cycling, it would save 4% of global transport emissions.
That is wild. That's an incredibly compelling data point.
And then economically, you mentioned saving street space. 18 bikes can fit in the space of one car. So in other words,
That's
18
amazing.
people can fit in the space of one car, which is an enormous saver on congestion. Now, I mentioned earlier that the cost of privately owning and maintaining a car in London is about £3,400 a year versus the £1,200 that I estimated it cost for Zipcar. How much do you reckon it would cost to own and maintain a bike in London for a year?
Can I cheat and give the number that you've
No,
written
you
here in the
can't.
notes? 500 pounds.
Nice guess. It's about 120 quid.
That's not bad at all.
The stuff that I like is actually just about the kind of almost scientific, philosophical perfection of the design. And I'm talking designer to designer here. So in 1973, Scientific American ran an article from a researcher called S.S. Wilson, who said that the bicycle was designed to, quote, make it easier for an individual to move about. And this the bicycle achieve in a way that outdoes natural evolution, because he showed that a human on a bicycle is the most energy efficient moving thing on the face of the planet.
Is that still true?
Well, in 2025, Scientific American revisited the graph and they found that yes, it was still true.
Wow.
It beats rabbits, fruit flies, hummingbirds, jet planes, and humans walking.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, this is quite amazing.
It is, isn't it? Steve Jobs was so inspired by this article in 1973 that he coined that phrase that he often used, which was the computer is a bicycle for the mind, because he loved this idea that it was the most efficient thing that was ever designed.
Well, this is a beautiful graph.
Isn't it?
Wow,
do you
okay.
need a minute with the graph?
I do. I know. I do. I do need a minute with this graph. Okay, no, continue, but it is beautiful.
So Wilson explained it like this: since the bicycle makes little demand on material or energy resources, contributes little to pollution, makes a positive contribution to health, causes little death or injury, it can be regarded as the most benevolent of machines. The most benevolent of machines. And then my favorite writer on this is Ivan Illich, who's a Russian emigre and philosopher. And I was reminded by a couple of friends about his book, Energy and Equity. He wrote an essay where he talked about this idea that the car is too much energy. That similar to when we have too much food, we glut ourselves and we become obese and become a risk to other people because we, become a burden on the healthcare system. We're unable to perform our social functions and everything else. But he said the bicycle is the perfect transducer to match man's metabolic energy to the impedance of locomotion. Equipped with this tool, man outstrips the efficiency of not only all machines, but all other animals as well. So again, it's the perfect design. Illich described it as, quote, a new order beyond which progress is not theoretically possible. The fact that I love most in his book is he points out that it's the only thing we've ever invented that allows you to actually go door to door. So you mentioned earlier this thing with it being a sort of cultural problem, and I actually began with that. I pointed out that really the failure of Zipcar, the push towards autonomous vehicles, and us forgetting the bike are failures of policy. They're not really a technical problem or a design problem. It's a failure of policy and culture. When you think of a cycling hotspot, what do you think of? What country would you say you would closely associate with the bicycle?
I mean, I would say like the city of Amsterdam, so the Netherlands. But what do we know about that city and the way it was designed?
It's designed around canals for boats.
And then?
Cars.
No, it was not.
It was.
It was designed for cars?
Yeah.
But it was designed for European teeny binny cars.
Again, normal sized cars. For normal people in a normal country. Yeah, the Netherlands. You're right. Yeah, Holland, Netherlands, most amount of cyclists per capita, but it wasn't always the way, right? And actually, this is a story of a policy success.
Okay, that's interesting.
If you were to go to Amsterdam in 1946, there were no bicycles because the Nazis took them all. And cars were booming as they were all over Europe in the post-war period. And there was an existing campaign in the Netherlands against children's deaths by cars. Without going into the ins and outs of that, it coincided with the 1973 OPEC oil prices, where the OPEC cartel massively increased oil prices, forcing oil shortages on Europe, and different countries had to respond in different ways. In the Netherlands, they banned cars on Sundays. And at the same time as people were sort of getting used to the dangers of cars, they were also starting to see and experience the benefits of bicycles, which then accelerated and amplified the campaigns that were already going on and forced through changes in policy that made better infrastructure to protect cyclists, to change insurance laws. So, for instance, they changed laws that put the liability of accidents on car drivers rather than bicycles, on the assumption that cyclists do not intentionally crash into cars, so it is unlikely to be their fault. Is the quote
Very
that I
fair.
found.
Yeah.
So it basically made cycling a lot safer, both infrastructurally and in terms of policy, which then normalized it because they became used to it and they saw it as part of the fabric of the city in a different way. We now look at Amsterdam and assume that that's always been the way it was, but it wasn't. It was quite an about turn. Two much more contemporary examples. Both London and Paris through COVID left in place a lot of the infrastructure was put in to support those cyclists during those periods. It's meant that London has had a 43% increase in cyclists since COVID, and Paris, which put in 50 kilometers of new lanes, has doubled.
I think there are certain things that are not just policy. There's like the policy implications of it, there's the design of the city, and then there's the mindset shift that needs to happen amongst citizens here. To say, maybe I go to the grocery store twice a week or 3 times a week instead of once every 2 weeks or whatever it might be, and don't come home with 6 bags of groceries, but I come home with 2. And that is how I think about the cadence of my life and my lifestyle.
And the cultural bit is harder to pin down. A major difference between, let's say, the so-called developed world and the developing world. Bicycles are also somewhat aspirational. You know, it sort of says something about what you believe in and that you're, greener or you're into your fitness, whatever it is. Whereas, obviously, in some parts, the car is aspirational. Right? Owning a car, having that private vehicle, having the brand. And my last piece on the cultural thing, we had someone into the office once from one of the world's biggest bicycle manufacturers. And they talked about this idea that they didn't want to make more cyclists. They wanted to make more people who ride bikes. That cycling as a culture is quite masculine, quite exclusive, tall, skinny white guys like me in Lycra. And that had a negative association. And by rephrasing, it's just people who ride bikes. It broadens it culturally and doesn't make it a clique and a gang, but makes it a thing that's just another tool that you might use every day, which I thought was a really smart way of thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, that's my piece to you. Zipcar felt like a piece of the future being closed, and I don't feel much excitement about the autonomous car future other than the sort of rubbernecking I'm sure I'll be doing of them, and I'll probably ride 1 or 2. But I do think, the future we should be needing and having is right under our feet. We've got the perfect design already. We just need to find the right policy and cultural tools to normalize it.
I buy into the vision, but it has to work for a good amount of people, a majority of human beings, for that to come to fruition in some manner.
I've said this before on the record in many places, and I'll say it again. I can easily imagine the end of most cars for most journeys in most cities. Not for all of them. They'll still be needed. Elder folks who are less able. The reason I Zipcar is sometimes I can't do it on a bike. I've got to pick up something big, or it's a long distance, or got to carry more than one kid. I get that. That's totally fine. But the bicycle is the liberating technology which gets us to a world where it is the end of most cars for most journeys in most cities. And as you said, it's that multimodal piece that brings it to life.
Well, you've made me a believer, Tobias.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Although this is a personal thing for me, what I really want to make is the sheer design case for it. That it's just the best design we have.
I don't know how I feel about that. The data says you're right, but I want you to be wrong.
The data and the scholarship says you're right.
The data and the scholarship says you're right. But that's not how we build facts over here, sir. And that's a me problem. It's not a you problem. I'll say that.
It's a cultural problem. It's because we've got roads and parking everywhere. You see it all the time.
I don't want to have roads everywhere. I want to have beautiful, open, green parks and lovely urban gardens and shit like that. Anyway, sir.
Toodles.
Bye.